Hello and welcome to this briefing by the Jerusalem Press Club. I am Jonathan Beck. There are several widely accepted assumptions about the attack that marked the beginning of the Iron Swords War on October 7, 2023. First, that it was a surprise attack. Second, that it was a massive intelligence failure on the side of Israel. And third, that Hamas went into war in order to bring about the release of Palestinian prisoners and to stymie a process of Israel and Saudi Arabia coming closer together and potentially even agreeing to sign a peace deal. However, a new study calls all of these assumptions to question, some to a larger degree than others, and our guest today is the author of this study. The study is titled The Strategic Origins of Hamas's October 7 Attack, and it was published in volume 49 of Studies in Conflict and Terrorism, and it exposes the terror group's grandiose ambitions. Let me introduce our guest. Professor Daniel Sobelman is head of the Department of International Security and Diplomacy at the Hebrew University School of International Relations in Jerusalem. He's an expert in theories of coercion in international relations, asymmetrical deterrence, the relations between Israel and Hezbollah, and international relations in the Middle East. Sobelman is also a researcher at the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard University. Hello, Professor Sobelman, and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for inviting me.
So first of all, regarding the element of surprise, just in our chat now before we began, I said maybe the surprise was not so big because there were. I read this morning most of your study. It's quite an extensive piece of literature, but it shows that there were some premonitions, essentially guardian of the wall, the so-called, how Hamas called it, unforeseen blessing of the Israeli Arabs joining the fight, and also the extended range of Hamas rockets. Let me just add before you answer, before I ask you to expand, that your study is based on a trove of Arabic language documents that the IDF seized during the war, the Iron Swords War, and so it draws on previously unseen material. So can you expand on the element of surprise and in this sense?
Yeah, sure. So October 7th was obviously a massive intelligence surprise, a massive, I would say, failure of the imagination. I don't think anyone, even those who actually held in their hands the intelligence material in the Israeli intelligence community, could even fathom the idea that Hamas would invade Israel en masse and commit these atrocities, etc. Now, the interesting thing, by the way, about all these stunning intelligence surprises, and this is in the league of the Yom Kippur War and Pearl Harbor and Barbarossa and 9/11, etc., is that it's never a failure of the intelligence in the sense that there was always incredible intelligence in all these cases. And in the case of October 7th, as Jonathan is pointing out, including in the open source intelligence, right? So statements by Hamas's Yahya Sinwar and Ismail Haniyeh in real time in May and June of 2021, in which they state openly that what we just had in May of 2021 was a dress rehearsal. They both used the same expression, dress rehearsal. And it was a dress rehearsal towards the next round of conflict, which is going to be about the liberation of Palestine, the destruction of Israel. Both of them, especially Sinwar, were speaking in really far-reaching messianic terminology, such as, we are going to change the map of the Middle East. And now this is in terms of the open source material. I was actually, so this huge study, which consists of, this is a 29-page study with hundreds of footnotes, which I had been working on for, it really encapsulates work, like years worth of work. And it's also a follow-up and builds on my my book about the axis of resistance and asymmetrical deterrence are rules of the game in contemporary Middle East conflicts, which is under review, which is an academic book, which is under review when October 7th happened. Now, in this book, which already was under review, I have stuff that I had collected in real time in 2020 and 2021, in which um, Hamas and Hezbollah published the fact that they were already working on, establishing working groups towards the liberation of Palestine, towards the destruction of Israel. So in that respect, the surprise was, yes, it was a stunning surprise, but there were signals that this was, in fact, something dramatic was going to happen. But one of the signals was that, again, in real time, this is open source material, even though it's corroborated, obviously, in the most stunning way in all these documents that the IDF has seized. The IDF has seized literally tons of documents. They've only released a few dozens of them, which are quite fascinating. And in those documents, basically see what you see is the way in which Hamas, mostly Hamas, but also Hezbollah, gravitated towards really coming to the conclusion that Israel's destruction was possible, next generations, that this is not some ideological or religious, vision. This was about the next couple of years.
I mean, we've obviously known from Hassan Nasrallah's spiderweb speech and also the Hamas charter that destroying Israel is a goal they strive for, but the difference was, as you say, that instead of being some kind of Islamist utopia, of course, in their thinking, they thought it was feasible. Now, there's two sides to this. One of them, I think, mostly about the first half of the article, is about the reasons for this that are internal, so to speak. The Palestinians, the Hamas, not the Palestinians, the Hamas shift from a sort of defensive resistance to an offensive posture. And Guardian of the Wall was just one aspect of this. And a second one was also, of course, the enemy's side. That is the political situation in Israel, also the political makeup of the Israeli government, which I think made them think that there's a new sense of urgency. Can you discuss this for a bit?
Yeah, and maybe before that, I'll preface. Let me just say a few things which I think are important to say, and both in terms of like putting this article, this study in context, and maybe also in terms of marketing it. I think that obviously we're now 2 years and 7 months after October 7th. It's unbelievable. There's no commission of inquiry. Hasn't even been established. Who knows if it ever takes place? Someone actually who had read this article a few weeks ago wrote me that after reading this article, he came to the conclusion that this article is the closest thing that currently exists to a commission of inquiry. And this is because the article really delves deep into the underlying strategic structural conditions that enabled and motivated Hamas to carry out October 7th. Another thing I would say is that Israel, to date, even today, 2 years and 7 months into October 7th, is still animated by three formative traumas. One trauma is obviously what happened on October 7th, which is the most traumatic, horrific day Israel has experienced. Its establishment. A lot of people refer to October 7th as a one-day Holocaust, because with all due respect, the Startup Nation and the F-35s and the nuclear weapons and all of that stuff, the state of Israel, for all intents and purposes, was completely absent for an entire day. And a lot of people were butchered, entire families, not on the Suez Canal or the Golan Heights like in 1973, but in their kitchens after hours and hours, by the way, of calling the police and no one showing up because there was no country. The second trauma was the realization of what could have happened. Not only was it the most horrific day in Israel's history, but it could have easily been 10 times worse, even existential. Now, it doesn't matter if you and I agree that or disagree about whether it was existential or not. This is the belief of the prime minister, who is the one who counts. Um, and this is the way he sees it, that Israel that day was facing an existential threat. And the third trauma is a retrospective trauma, and the trauma of just the extent to which Israel had become deterred and coerced and compelled by Hamas and Hezbollah and the entire axis of resistance. Now, this is really described and analyzed in depth in this article. The extent to which Israel pre-October 7th was deterred by Hamas and Hezbollah. I don't know how many of the viewers or listeners remember this, but for 6 months before October 7th, Hezbollah had erected a tent about 40 meters south of the fence, like literally within Israeli territory. And Israel for 6 months did not even dare touch that tent because Nasrallah had communicated to Israel in so many words that if you touch that tent, then there's going to be a war, or there could be a war. And also, as described in this article, he was threatening that a war with Hezbollah that would turn into a war with the axis of resistance would be existential for Israel. Now, the idea that the next war would be existential for Israel, not anything limited, but a war that would conclude with Israel's destruction, was an assessment that had come into being and was already being expressed again publicly by Hezbollah, by Nasrallah. And the year or maybe a couple of years before, I would say a year and a half before October 7th. And all of this is, that combined with the open source declarations of Hania and Sinwar give us a sense of where the other camp, the axis of resistance, where they had and the way in which their thinking had evolved. Now, this goes back to the retrospective trauma, which now I think if I had to assess, I would say that Israel is now animated by that trauma. We don't want to be deterred by anyone ever again, which is why Israel uh, has been determined. I'm not justifying or not justifying this. I'm just explaining Israel's psychology. This accounts for Israel's determination, which unfortunately I think is unrealistic, but to render Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iranians, the entire axis of resistance, um, strategically cloudless, not worthwhile. And this I'm just describing Israel's psychology. Um, so the article really delves deep into the strategic foundations of October 7th. Um, I don't think, by the way, anyone can, the war is still going on. We're still in an active conflict, and we haven't reached the day after. But I think that anyone who wants to understand or gauge or assess where we are right now in terms of Israel's accomplishments, then I think that one of the major accomplishments to date, could be temporary, but to date, this axis of resistance as a coordinated strategic geopolitical construct in the Middle East that surrounds Israel and deters Israel and declares ultimatums to Israel no longer exists to that extent. And from a purely strategic standpoint, the fact that Israel is not deterred by Hamas or Hezbollah, or by even the Iranians, that's a dramatic, far-reaching accomplishment. Of course, without translating that, phenomenal military intelligence strategic accomplishment into a more everlasting, durable, diplomatic, strategic, formal agreement that would reshape the regional order in the Middle East. Um, Unfortunately, what we know is that even the most far-reaching, phenomenal military accomplishments can be a lot more temporary, even fleeting, than what a lot of people imagine. And now, to go back to your specific question about the establishment of this current Israeli government, and the effect that this had on October 7th, I think that one thing we need to realize is that, and this is like this is clearly and undisputed in both in the open source declarations, the open public declarations of Hamas and Hezbollah, and those documents, is that from Hamas's point of view, they were already prepared to unleash October 7th in 2022. And they communicated this in so many words to Hezbollah. And I would say that the establishment of this, the most right-wing extreme government in Israel's history was it was a precipitating cause, a precipitating factor. Again, this article, my studies really delved down to the more strategic layers, the strategic levels and foundations of the broader regional infrastructure that had come into being in the Middle East. It is this infrastructure that Hamas had become strategically tethered to. And I would say 2, 3 years before October 7th, and what they had realized was that they were in a position now. This is what Sinwar realized, that he was in a position now to basically throw a hand grenade beneath that entire infrastructure, which had become this potent, very combustible regional infrastructure, and blow it up in Israel's face. Now, a really interesting and dramatic, I would say, revelation is a document that was I think it's a 5-page document sent by Hamas's Sinwar to Hania in June of 2022, where this is just a few days before Hania was to meet with Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah, and he sends Hania this document um, detailing 3 scenarios that Hamas would be interested in carrying out in coordination with Hezbollah. And the first scenario, basically, he's talking about the destruction of the state of Israel. And this is in the article. This is described in the article. The 3 scenarios, the sense of the preferred scenario, and the one who's Sinwar writing, would be the scenario of a great strategic battle, the battle of the promise of the hereafter. The scenario stipulated that we, along with Hezbollah, the resistance forces, and the axis of Jerusalem in the region, without Iran, enter with all our forces into a full force surprise confrontation in all the arenas to bring down and end the occupation state, right? Not end the occupation of the 1967 borders, but end the state of Israel. This would utterly change the face of the region, its regimes, and its political reality, and would also bring about the great Islamic revolution in the region. Sinwar also writes, the brethren in the military echelon are convinced that we are capable of achieving the desired objective. Um, uh, this is the first scenario. The second scenario is described as a medium level battle designed to humiliate the enemy, smash its capabilities, its prestige, and its motivation to fight, crush its morale, and drive many to immigrate. This scenario would bring about the release of the prisoners, result in the liberation of the West Bank, and break the image of the enemy of Israel as a power capable of constituting the axis of a Zionist-Sunni alliance. All right. Now,
I have to ask two things though. I mean, first of all, if they were prepared already in 2022, then why did they wait to the end of 2023? And also, something you haven't yet discussed is that the other forces of the Axis did try to dissuade Sinwar from doing it. So, what was his thinking when he decided to have a go at it anyway?
so actually, they did not really try to dissuade Sinwar, because there's another document that the IDF has seized, and this was Hania updating Sinwar immediately after that meeting with Nasrallah. And he says, Nasrallah stopped me at scenario one. We didn't even get to the third scenario because he stopped me and said, this is the scenario we're going to go for. Scenario one of destroying
Which
Israel.
is
This
the
is
war by points, yeah?
no, this is the war of destroying Israel, of liberating Palestine.
No, but
Now,
Nasrallah preferred like a sort of attrition scenario, no?
not in this document. In reality, what happens is that Hamas, in essence, jumps the gun and acts in well, we're never gonna fully know, partly because they're all dead, but Hamas jumps the gun, and I think they assume they on October 7th, what they assume is that Hezbollah is going to follow suit, at least to a significant extent. Now, whether Hamas was intending to lure, entrap, um, I don't know, something between like convince Hezbollah to join full on, or entrap Hezbollah into the situation, I don't think we're ever going to know. But the truth of the matter is that they acted in unilaterally, and about 15, 20 minutes into the invasion, uh, the Def and Sinwar um send a long letter to Nasrallah, to Hezbollah. This is, I think it's like 5 or 6 page letter that they send like shortly after the operation starts. In other words, it was prepared well in advance. And in it, they call on him to seize on the opportunity. And they warn that any hesitance, now that our Hamas's forces have invaded Israel, as any hesitance would result in the squandering of this opportunity. Um, so in that respect, we know how things evolved, and the way in which things evolved is that Hezbollah only joined the following day. Now, this goes back to the second and third trauma that are animating Israel, is that we now know that had one person, had Nasrallah that morning decided otherwise, then there was an IDF general who was cited by Nir Dvori on Channel 12. Dvori, of course, he said this about a year and a half after the guy told him that had Hezbollah joined in, then Hezbollah and Hamas would have shook hands in downtown Tel Aviv. Now, Nir Dvori did not.
But I have to ask you. I mean, I have to ask you in this context. I remember quite well the months of July and August 2024, and I mean, from what we've been told, yeah, in the media, the so-called beeper operation had already been in preparation for several years. You know, this kind of Mossad operation of rigging those beepers with the tiny amount, etc., takes a long, long time. And I distinctly remember, you know, former IDF officials telling Israelis in early July, late June, you know, you should get the six bottles of water packages and band-aids and first aid and prepare. And everyone was talking this, and this was like a year into the war with Hamas. And everyone was talking about the war with Hezbollah as a sort of apocalyptic scenario. Now, was this an instance of the Israeli government actually trying to put Hezbollah to sleep because they were aware of the beepers that have been in the news? Or was it still a genuine sort of the same kind of sentiment?
No, I don't think that's. I think that the way in which this war evolved is was not really pre-planned. Let's put it that way. I don't think that Netanyahu, like 3, 4 months before the pager operation, knew that he was going to reach that what he thought later was a decisive victory over Hezbollah. Also, one of the people I interview in this article is now late, unfortunately, commander of the IDF Intelligence Research Division, Brigadier General Amit Saab, who told me that the pager operation was in fact not even a possibility, was not possible, was not in the cards on October 7th, right? So you hear a lot of conflicting information about this, but in July, the way in which the whole the war with Hezbollah evolved over time was the tactical accumulation of tactical achievements and opportunities. And all of a sudden, what happens is that it reached the critical mass whereby Israel was all of a sudden in a position to um, escalate in that fashion against Hezbollah. But also knowing the way in which Israeli decision making and thinking, strategic thinking works, now to look back retroactively at this war and to say, okay, all of this was planned strategically is really misreading and the way in which decision making in Israel works. Uh, in Israel, it's mostly the achievement of step-by-step tactical achievements rather than October 7th happening and then the government or the security establishment having a clear strategic long-term idea of how this is going to end 2 years and 7 months from today. That's not the way in which it works in Israel.
Okay. Taking this forward, so to speak. I think something that's really constant in this region is the ideologies, whether it's going to be the Shiite ideology of Hezbollah, which, I mean, today actually has a territorial dispute with Israel, but did not have it on October 7th. You know, only the Sheba farms is not reason enough to go to all-out war. And also, Hamas, as degraded and as incapable as it is today, probably holds to the same ideology. So what can Israel do for the future, especially considering that the wars are not over, with the thinking that this thought? Do you think this is? Let me ask it a different way: is this gone? The thinking that Israel can be toppled? Are they beaten enough on all fronts to go back to the policy of fighting by attrition, fighting by points, or are they still in the thinking that, if you topple the Israeli home front, then Israel will collapse inwards?
No, so well, first of all, the most I would say the most crucial thing that Israel has to do is that, and this has been my critique of Israel. Let's put it this way: is it has been that um, it's achieved a series of phenomenal intelligence, military operational achievements over the past 2 years. And it's never enough, right? It's never enough. And no achievement, not the killing of Sinwar and Hania and Nasrallah. And, now we've already been to a war with Iran twice. The whole idea of strategy is when do you, and of military, of wars in general, is that there comes a stage where you have to cash in. You have to cash in, cash out, translate those phenomenal achievements into a durable strategic reality that would reshape your strategic environment in your favor long term. And this Israel has failed to do. And this, again, we are always surprised anew the way in which military achievements turn out to be very temporary. I mean, just look at Lebanon now, or look at Iran, that they've been recuperating, even the harshest military blows that were implemented by Israel over the past couple of years. So this is the I would say the top priority that should be guiding Israel. This doesn't preclude the fact that at the moment, Hamas is completely decimated. I mean, the idea of Hamas unleashing another October 7th, I don't want to say ever again, but it's as close to ever again that we can think of right now. It just seems so far-fetched. And the same applies to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Most of southern Lebanon, all the villages, the towns, many of them look like the Gaza Strip right now. In other words, they've been leveled to the ground. They don't even exist anymore.
Is there though a doubt if the Israeli forces that are now deployed in Lebanon, and as at these days, 2 days ago we had a briefing on the optic fiber drones. The soldiers there.
That's all very tactical. We've reduced Hezbollah down to we're fighting a war of attrition. They've gone back from being a strategic military that could potentially, this is the way they thought of, this is the way they perceive themselves, and this is the way Israel perceived them as Israel's central and most threatening enemy, a strategic enemy, there was a regional player in the Middle East. They've been reduced. There's been what you call an IR, a redistribution of power, not just in the Middle East, but also within Lebanon. And this has come to a dramatic expense at the expense of Hezbollah. And the party that's benefiting from this, Lebanon-wise, is the central government. So Hezbollah is no longer in a position to strategically threaten Israel with a mass invasion and the occupying villages or towns in northern Israel. They're not in a position to do that. And it's probably
Even
going
if
to take
Israel
them years.
withdraws, even if Israel withdraws to the UN border, south of the Litani, and sort of says we've had. I mean, there's no doubt that Hezbollah will redeploy even in the relics of those villages. No.
Yeah, Hezbollah would redeploy, and I think that in terms of like breaking their spirit, then surprisingly, what has happened to them has not broken their ideology. At least not thus far, and I'm not optimistic in that respect. I don't think that Israel's going to be able to break their spirit and definitely not make them recognize Israel's right to exist or anything like this. But in terms of inflicting massive this is like the closest thing you've had to to mutual assured destruction. Vast swaths of southern Lebanon have been, and Gaza Strip. They look as if as if a nuclear bomb had dropped on them. Now this, one would think, at least would buy us a great deal of time if Israel were to withdraw to the international back to the international border, which is right now I think it's mostly a political issue. Um, if Israel were to do that, then I think we will have gained long-term deterrent impact that will
So,
reshape the reality along the northern border and buy us a great deal of time with which Israel should think about how to again translate this new the redistribution of power and harness it in the service of reaching a new arrangement, at least an arrangement with the government of Lebanon. Now that Hezbollah has been dramatically weakened, it's lost Syria. It will take Hezbollah, if this is at all possible, take them many years to recuperate.
I mean, looking at the two immediate fronts, disregarding Iran for a second, because Iran is not on the border of Israel, at least in a physical sense. The big difference is obviously Hamas is even more degraded than Hezbollah, but in Lebanon we have this non-state actor which is grasping the Lebanese state almost like some kind of cancer or something, and there is a Lebanese government which may be incapable but has at least expressed the will to disarm it and to dismantle it. And you would think potentially that there is at least maybe a point at which Hezbollah is degraded enough so that this third party, the Lebanese government, will step in and continue to do the job instead of Israel. In Gaza, there isn't really. You have the Board of Peace, but that's sort of like an appointed committee. It's not really an internal Palestinian voice saying, this has been the wrong way. So, in the sort of balance between deterrence, if you actually, by the way, believe in that concept, because I've interviewed over the past 2.5 years people who say they do not believe in deterrence. Between that and a simple sort of mowing the grass in the sense of tactically always degrading the actual possibility of enemies of Israel to attack it, what would you say is the way forward, considering the ideologies are not going to change. They're not going to read Herzl's Altneuland and change their minds. So is it about them just being afraid to attack, or simply not letting them get anything larger than a drone or a light firearm? Where is the way forward? Of course, we would like a peace deal with Lebanon, with the government, and a pledge from them to take care of Hezbollah. We cannot have that in the Gaza Strip. So what would be the way?
So in terms of Hezbollah, I would say that we are now facing a window of opportunity, which is not perfect, but it's a window of opportunity we haven't had in 26 years at least since 2000. We have not had such uh, a window of opportunity vis-a-vis Lebanon and the situation in Lebanon and vis-a-vis Hezbollah. Hezbollah has been downgraded, degraded back to where it stood about 25 years ago, back to being a guerrilla organization. Now, the government of Lebanon now, I don't think it's in a position to like unilaterally and forcibly disarm Hezbollah. I don't think that is in the cards. But it has shown a level of resolve and political willingness to do things that were until very, not that long ago, really fanciful. So we've come a huge way, and I wouldn't squander that opportunity just because Hezbollah would continue to exist within Lebanon. We have an opportunity to really reshape the rules of the game vis-a-vis Lebanon, even if that's short of full normalization, the exchange of ambassadors, etc. Even short of that, I think that we now have an opportunity to accomplish something that is far-reaching and unprecedented. Both because Hezbollah has been dramatically weakened and because Hezbollah has also lost Syria. Shouldn't forget the fact that they've lost their strategic depth, their strategic hinterland in terms of the Syrian of Bashar al-Assad regime. They no longer have Syria. And the Lebanese government no longer has Syria threatening them in a very palpable fashion, lest they normalize with Israel. So geopolitically, the situation is dramatically different. And again, it could be temporary. So this is a time to seize on opportunities that could be a lot more temporary than we think. Now, when you say you've interviewed people who are Israelis who, somewhat understandably say this was, I guess, the sentiment immediately after October 7th. I remember journalist Ben Caspit, I remember, published an article saying, or an op-ed saying, Israel shall outlaw the word deterrence. Just outlaw that term. Deterrence is BS. It's not. It doesn't exist. It's a fantasy.
Because deterrence implies also rational thinking, yeah, on the side of your adversaries, and like a cost-benefit analysis.
The other side does have a cost-benefit analysis. I don't think that the other side, that's what I'm describing in this article. So right now, you look at where Hamas or Hezbollah, where they stand right now, and you could argue that at least Hamas committed suicide, which is not the most rational thing to do in life. Nonetheless, what I'm showing in this article, and this is my reading, is that even though will probably always be messianic and God is with us and that's why we're going to succeed because God is on our side. This was also, first of all, they always had that sort of, that way of thinking always characterized them. So this is a very religious organization. Nonetheless, from a strategic standpoint, they made a strategic calculation, just bringing into account their assets, the various strategic regional factors that could work their way. And they had come to the conclusion that Israel's destruction was possible that morning. Now, the thing is that nowadays, you can close your eyes for 5 seconds and imagine a scenario where October 7th indeed succeeds. I don't know what it means. I don't know what it like truly existential means, but you could easily imagine or see a scenario in which it succeeds 10 times more than it succeeded on October 7th. In other words, just imagine a scenario in which they are capable of reaching Air Force bases in Tilnof and this is the reason Hamas was live streaming the whole thing, right? Because they wanted their various audiences, and this is in the documents. They wanted their various popular audiences in Jordan, in Lebanon. I'm talking about the population, to witness live on their phones that the way in which Israel was coming down and was basically falling down that morning. So
Yeah,
imagine,
let me just interrupt you to quote actually a document from August 22 in your article where you said he the attack needed to produce explosive images so as to, this is a quote, so as to trigger, of course in Arabic you wrote this, so as to trigger a surge of euphoria, frenzy, and momentum among our people, especially among the residents of the West Bank, the internal Jerusalem, and our entire Islamic nation. This is meant to spur them to respond to the calls to rise up and revolt while simultaneously sowing fear and terror among the enemy. That's another very big explanation of why they were so strong, unlike the GoPros and the
yeah,
streaming
yeah.
devices.
Those, by the way, those are Sinwar's words. Those
Yeah,
are like
yeah. This is the quote
Sinwar's
from the
words,
paper.
right? And that's why they also the operation, the attack, the invasion is codenamed Tufan al-Aqsa, which is the flood of al-Aqsa, because this is what they envisaged was that literally people, not just Hezbollah, just the masses would flood towards that, the ground zero of Al-Aqsa, or flood the Israel's borders that morning. And shortly, very shortly, in the first hour after October 7th, the military commander of Hamas, this is also in the article, Mohammed Deif, released an audio in which he turns to our strategic partners in the region, saying that this is the day in which we all converge, and this is your day. This is your day. This is about the liberation of Palestine. And this is also what they communicated to Nasrallah that morning. So, why in May of 2021, during Guardian of the Wall, Shomil Hamod, why we experienced internal strife in the the villages and towns and cities in Israel, but didn't experience that on October 7th. What accounts for that variation, I don't know. But Hamas was banking on, those explosive images, motivating Arab Israelis, Palestinian Israelis, or whichever way you want to characterize them, and Jerusalemites and West Bankers and Jordanians and Syrians and Lebanese and Egyptians to witness through live stream the way in which Israel was basically being overwhelmed by Hamas in southern Israel, and to follow suit. Now, an interesting thing to I think bears mentioning is that this is like, I think if this was last December, the current leader of Hamas, Khalil al-Haya, gave a speech on Hamas's anniversary and said, we presented the world with a model, and this is after, right, Gaza Strip has been destroyed and occupied by Israel, etc., reoccupied, or half of it at least. And he says, we presented what October 7th showed, that there's a model. We presented a model to the region, to the Palestinians, to the world, what can be accomplished if we were, all of us, to take joint action in a calculated way against Israel. So we're left with, in that respect, we're left with, there's a question, because the war hasn't ended, and the perception hasn't been fully shaped, I guess. And this goes back to the point of not breaking the spirit and the ideology of the resistance. So was October 7th an illustration of the disaster that would befall the Palestinians and the Hezbollah and the Iranians, etc., if they seriously tried to destroy Israel? Then it would be mutually assured destruction? Or was this, okay, we failed last time, let's try better next time, we'll be more coordinated? And this, I think, is going to shape Israel's strategic mindset for many, many years to come. Because one of the impacts of October 7th has been this very a rude awakening and reminder to the fact that Israel has zero strategic depth. Even if Israel stays in half of the Gaza Strip, even if Israel stays in southern Lebanon, where it right now is deployed, Israel has no strategic depth. This is a country where no like the military sophistication or sensors or what have you. Nothing is going to change the fact that the distance from Khan Yunis to the kibbutzim is a minute and a half by donkey. Nothing's gonna
Yes.
ever gonna change that. And the same applies to the Jordanian front, to the Eastern Front. The same applies to Syria. The same applies to Lebanon. It's Israel has zero strategic depth, and this I think is going to reshape Israel's calculation and thinking and psychology now for many years to come.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much for this. Just to add, perhaps, as you were speaking, I was thinking maybe this, looking at the reverse psychological side of this, maybe this is why Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu kept on insisting on this like total victory, because nothing short of that would sort of exclude the possibility of another October 7. And one last point, you mentioned you only need to close your eyes to think what would happen if. So some people may call it divine providence, others may say circumstance. But if there had not been the Nova Party, people are saying that if they would not get stuck on the Nova Party, they would reach much further into Israel, into major cities, and inflict untold damage. I'll leave aside the question whether it was luck, divine providence, or a combination. Thank you so much for this talk, Professor Sobelman. I would like to
My
mention
pleasure.
to our listeners, as I said, we can send you. I sure agree. We can send you a PDF of the article if you ask us for it. It's replete with quotes, obviously in English, translated from Arabic, from the documents that Professor Sobelman has gone over, and it's full of many sources. There's like 3.5 pages of sources down there. And of course, this briefing will be on our YouTube channel later today or early tomorrow. Thank you so much for your time, Professor Sobelman of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.